Alright, good afternoon everyone.
Could you do something with the column?
Yeah, just move it.
Just whack it out with a sledgehammer.
Alright, Nick.
Alright, cool. Good afternoon everyone. My name is Nicholas Ames and today we'll be reviewing a look into the reintegration of industrial spaces and new uses. The research conducted over the first part of the semester has been able to guide me in a positive direction in my work and provide a greater understanding of how I can accomplish the thesis. So, major items we'll be discussing will be the goals of the thesis, a look into the precedent projects of this scale that have been done before, and a graphic look at how it will, a graphic look at the life of an industrial building. One of the major goals from this will be the reintroduction to community within the site. After nearly a year of separation from your neighbor, it may be hard for some people to get used to the old way of life before the pandemic. So how can we program for reflex distancing? This is a more recent idea and will be researched further for programming. The second social issue is bridging the income classes, and how the site does not prohibit the lower classes. The past has sadly explained how low-income housing is failing as families are not moving out after time and they become high-maintenance problems for towns and cities. So the inclusion of mixed-income apartments where your next-door neighbor may make 3 times more than you or 3 times less than you would be the result. Now, thousands of buildings across the United States at this moment are collecting dust and growing weeds where new families, companies, and even schools could be moving into. As cities gain population, space becomes more scarce to develop new construction. The cities must build up instead of out, if the society's goal is for a greener future. Reusing past structures can have a huge impact on land conservation as well as carbon output across the globe. A new building that is 30% more efficient than an existing will have to wait 10 to 80 years before the amount of carbon put into it equals out. Restoration of the old site will be determined on a case-by-case basis, as century-old buildings, structures have more unique designs, as well as different envelope failures as time progresses. When is there a better time than now to design efficiently? This is the time to think different and move forward with sustainable implementations across the field of architecture. With new technologies. The use of electrochromic smart glass could significantly reduce the energy use of a building by 20% by blocking out radiation from the sun, putting less force on the internal systems. In colder climates, geothermal heating can provide free warm air that is consistently between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, just a few feet below the Earth's surface. While solar and passive design are great, there are more technologies that can become mainstream as well. Now, we also have to take a look into the preservation effort. The color of mortar and paint will have to be chosen by a preservation board member if the site is noted as historic, which will vary in its location. Determining the heavy construction areas of a project is unique and may be more complicated via the given site. Studies and evaluations of the structure of the building are one of the most important areas in the redesign process. While seeing a portion of the building failing structurally may be discouraging at first, this is actually an open door for an addition or redevelopment to the space. And this can lead to the next major wow space between the threshold of the old and new. Overall structural analysis will require resourcing of an engineered team to evaluate the structure of the envelope of the building. This team will be focusing on stress cracks in concrete structure, failures in masonry and sealant joints, points of water air leakage, and more. After the evaluation is completed, the team should be able to come up with an estimate of the effort needed to reseal the building envelope, enhance structure, and price out the renovation. While the preservationist route is liked by some, I would argue that the contrast design idea develops the new building into a longer lasting piece. One author, Christian Skiddick, said that in the case of conversion, design strategies break free from the either or polarity of old and new, which means they are always both. Properties with contrasting designs can stand the test of time with the expression of acknowledging the old while celebrating the new era thought in design. So, When we look at the life of an industrial building in 4 stages, stage 1 covers the first life the building kicks off. A rectangular prism is the basis for the early industrial planning. Smokestacks, entry systems, and fenestration would add a lot of character to the building, and if the budget was there, maybe some arches above the windows. In its heyday, these complexes were well-oiled machines, with dozens, if not 100 workers constantly producing material. But after some time, the company has a fallout somehow, some way, and eventually has to shut down, laying off all the employees. As the building sits unattended and on the market, there's no attention to regular building maintenance. The abandoned structure sits this way for years, decades, and even a century in some instances. Natural forces will batter the building with rain and snow, if in a cold climate. And even if nature holds back, human nature kicks in with vandalism. Stage 2 can end up lasting a long time, and the client in the designer's role is to figure out how to get not just the same numbers of people the site would have seen, but greater numbers of shoppers, renters, and common citizens. So stage 3 begins with the evaluation of the building's key features and their relevance in the redesign. This can include window replacements, new curtain wall schemes, rain entries, new extensions such as these noodle pods, and the rooftop bar. Once the building caters its program to a variety of clients, this would in turn boost the site activity. There can be even more engagement across the greater community and local towns by hosting outdoor events the likes of the Outdoor Food Truck Festival as well. In order for a site to be lasting for another 100 years of use, it needs to be ready to adapt for the user's need. Maybe this means it can be designed to be readily built up with limited reconstruction, or maybe it can end up bridging out over the other areas of the site with new construction in the other portion of the site. This new construction should be held to the same standard of adaptability and should be able to expand further as time progresses. As we take these concepts into the real world, 6 precedents have struck me with their own individual aspects that will influence the future design. Starting off, we have Caxia Forum, located in Madrid, Spain. This building used to be a power station built back in 1900. It was redesigned by Herzog and Demure in 2008. The new features have the user walk under the building to enter, seen in the upper right image, and adds a new 7-story exhibition space. And the interior is seen in the bottom right image of that space. This was chosen for the clash of materialities. This was the precedent model I ended up developing. This is right here, so you guys can see this. So it sort of highlights the major spaces of the building. You actually walk under the building, but underneath you is actually this very brand new theater. And then you have a huge central staircase in the new construction. Their biggest, one of the biggest features was they only kept the facades and sort of essential structures and sort of stripped everything else out, and it's a very modern interior now. Domino Park in Brooklyn. In 1865, this design as a sugar refinery is now turning into a mixed-use programming space designed by James Cornfield Opp. This project is still underway, but I chose it for its exterior use in stack scheme. The yard is fully open to the public, which means free and more accessible to people. The stack itself, as you can see on the upper right, is totally barren, and for the user, they can walk on the first floor and look straight up at the sky, highlighting the old design of the building. Next, we have Mass Mocha, located in North Andover, Massachusetts. This site used to be textile mills in the late 19th century, until the reconstruction in 1995 by Gruner Cott and Associates. The site takes a more preservationist and minimal look at the buildings, with limited changes to the exterior. Up next, we have Remise Schlesische Straße, located in Berlin, Germany. In the late 1800s, this site housed a large beer distribution center and was transformed in 2003 by Augustino and Frank Architekten. I chose this as it promotes a new modern addition, clashing with the original right below, while also having a minimal sight from the streets. Then we have the Inojima Art Project, located in Naoshimi, Japan. This site was only active for 10 years in the early 19th century and lay abandoned for almost a century. Designed by Kazuo Sejima, the site transformed the ruins of the former stone quarry and copper refinery into a new museum of natural resources in 2008. I chose this as designers exposed most of the existing structure on site while sinking the new functional building underground, respecting the former footprint. And lastly, we have Zesha Zulveren, designed by OMA in Essen, Germany. The former coal mine and plant was built in 1847, abandoned in 1986, and transformed in 2007. It now is a large gathering area with restaurants, art exhibits, museums, and more. I chose this as circulation around the site was unique, and as well for the endless amount of programming opportunities in this large space. So, what comes next? I'm going to be putting this research into the development of a program for a specified site and push for new grand schemes, as described earlier. Because when there is an opportunity to rebuild as opposed to build, that is the sustainable design need for the future. Thank you.
Is there a way for you to put
Go back.
your presentation, like show all the slides or something so we can ask you to go back to different ones?
Yeah, just hit escape.
Yeah. Hard drive.
And then if you go to slide sorter or something, I think that will.
Slide sorter or what?
Yeah, there's like 4 little cubes.
Yeah.
Ah.
Oh.
That's cool.
Can you go back?
Where would you like to go?
Well, I'm going to let other people jump in first because I'm closest to the thesis, but this is helpful.
Okay. Professor Temkin, you're muted.
Yeah. So, I initially evolved myself as an architect in Pittsburgh, which is a city that's done a lot of this. And when I got to study abroad while I was in school, the theme of the summer program I went on was the juxtaposition of new and old. So so the things that you're interested in are near and dear to my heart. On the one hand, I think while the kind of cartoon diagrams were fun, and a little fun, a little funny, but funny and kind of, I think the way you presented it, most people would appreciate and would get the points you're making. So while it's a little diagrammatic, I think it's effective at showing the progression and the need for adaptation. What I keep thinking as you were kind of coming to a close is kind of, if the question is, can you convince me that this is interesting and worth doing? Sure, right? But I'm trying to figure out how do you know how to proceed next, right? Again, kind of how do you make something that has a clear enough objective that you'll be able to assess whether you're pointing in the right, whether you're making forward or backward progress as you try to design into it. And I think that really becomes very important. I've seen great examples of adaptive reuse projects. I've seen projects that are a great adaptive reuse that has no longevity. So it sounds like, one of these things is trying to figure out, and you might want to try to find some precedent for buildings that have been adaptively reused multiple times, right? And what has made them more effective at that? Because it doesn't always work. Sometimes people make these projects. There was a mall in Pittsburgh that, in an old kind of a rail terminal building. And it was great in that, it was kind of hot in the 80s and 90s. And then as the 90s kind of came to a close, it just became more and more and more vacant. Now it's really depressing. So part of this is, what is the formula for greater versatility in future evolution? So the fact that you've acknowledged the fact that the thing needs to be able to not just be reborn, but be reborn and then be reborn again, right? I think is a very important conclusion. And then the other thing I was thinking is that, if you get to the very last slide and you're talking about site and program, I feel like you should decide whether you're going to start with the site or you're going to start with the program. Because I feel like in order to really test this, you've either got to take a program and find the right place to adapt and reuse it, right? And then ask yourself, how are you going to kind of show that you've planned for the next iteration after that, after that solution is over, right? Or you pick a function. I think I started with site, right? So you pick a location and find the right use, or you pick the use and then say, what is the right place to put this thing? Because that often becomes part of a challenge in these projects. From what I've seen, is that I love these huge old industrial buildings, and there were several projects in Pittsburgh that, for decades, architects looked at them with adoration and aspirations of turning them into someplace fabulous. And it always comes down to, when does the economics make it work, right? Because it's partly, when is there so much profit to be made that you can afford all of the brownfield mitigation that needs to take place? Or, if you've got 70,000 square feet of space, what the heck, can you afford to fill it in? Or, do you do it in stages? So I just feel like if you leave both as a variable to begin with, you may waste a lot of time because you're kind of attacking the problem from both directions. And I think you could totally test the thesis well either way, but I would say pick one, like find a building and say, I'm going to make this work. Or find a program and then make it your task to find the right adaptive use site to explore.
Yeah, I think that's a really great comment, and I think you could get more out of your precedents that will help with that. And actually, if you have it already, but maybe you didn't talk about it, one thing we spoke about was identifying specific strategies within each precedent and using the model to highlight those strategies, so that you're not just describing the precedents, which I think were all excellent and inspiring, certainly for the thesis, but that you're being very analytic about your process. And it felt a bit more like descriptions of the precedents instead of analysis of the precedents. Similarly, I think your model is beautiful, absolutely beautiful, but I don't know yet what it's showing me.
Okay.
And so I think you need to, again, transform it a bit to be a little clearer in its diagrammatic nature. So clearly showing, what's new, what's old. That could be one clear aspect of the diagram. And that if you can do that for more than one building, that will help to highlight different methods that these precedents have used. Going back to the beginning, when you talk about that carbon footprint and how different it is for reuse rather than new construction, I want to see that quote on your presentation, and I definitely want the citation.
Sure.
Because I know you have it, but I
You
just
want to read it?
I want to read the
Okay.
citation. Even
Sure.
if it's little, I want to see it.
All right.
I think overall the presentation was very clean, love what you did with these. Can you scroll up so you can see these little diagrams? And I think these very fast moves that you operated on this building with are actually pretty great, lots of them. The red, green, yellow sun is awful, so I would do a gray tone, grayscale version of this. It's just too, we see it so many times that it's too cartoon, right? So allow it to be grayscale. Maybe your insertions, your new pieces are color, and then they pop more.
Okay.
I also think that you should talk to Brian. Oh, I just lost his name. Philosophy. Brian Glennie.
Glennie.
Because he gave a lecture on graffiti maybe a year or two ago, and I like what you did with the graffiti, but I think you're missing the point of what a lot of people use graffiti for.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're going to put that in there, and you're talking to someone who knows about graffiti, even a little bit, I'm not an expert.
Sure.
I think you want to make sure that you're making the right statement.
Okay.
And he has this really, robust knowledge about graffiti and the history of graffiti. And it'd be great to just have that little bit of knowledge inserted there since you're showing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll stop there.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.